Well, good afternoon and welcome to this virtual launch of the 9th wave of ELSA. As many of you will know, we generally have a one-day conference on the occasion of the release of each wave of ELSA data and the publication of the report on the wave's findings. Together, we'll make do with a much shorter virtual affair, but I hope that this still stimulates your interest in the study. We're excited to live stream the event on our YouTube channel, opening it up to a much larger audience. And if you haven't done so already, do please subscribe to the channel. We already have some introductory videos and we'll be adding more in future, including one on our COVID study. We would also like to hear from you on any training videos you'd like to see, so do contact us by email, the website or Twitter. And our Twitter site contains the most up-to-date information on the study, describing the latest papers and so on, so please follow us there. We'll be fielding questions today via Slido, and you can find the link on the ELSA homepage, or you can go to sli.do and type the event code ELSA W9. It's very easy to use, and you don't need to download anything. You have the option of remaining anonymous or giving your name. Please feel free to type your question or comment as soon as you like, rather than waiting until the end of the presentations. In the general discussion, we would like to, you might like to indicate which presentation you're referring to so that there's no confusion, but we will be taking some questions after each of the presentations. I'm going now to share my screen. To show you the program for this afternoon. After a short summary of Wave 9 that I will show you in a moment, James Banks will talk about the COVID-19 Substudy that was carried out in the summer. The Wave 9 report consists of 3 thematic chapters together with extensive tables on economic, social and health data. The report can be downloaded from the ELSA website. So after James's presentation, we're going to have 3 short talks that summarize some of the findings of these chapters. In the second part of the conference, we have presentations on 2 new features of the ELSA dataset, that's on genetics and nutrition, and then we'll round off with an outline of our plans for Wave 10. Let me start then with a summary of Wave 9. This started in 2018 and July 2018 and took around a year to complete, and it was carried out in the usual format for ELSA, that is, each individual had a computer-assisted personal interview in their own home and also completed a questionnaire which they either gave to the interviewer or sent back through the post. Nurse assessments were carried out on around half the sample, that is, the people who didn't have one previously in Wave 8, and also the refreshment sample of new members. And in the end, we had responses from 8,736 respondents, as you can see, with a refreshment cohort of just under 900. And the Wave 9 data are now available from the UK Data Service. Most of the content, as is usual, was the same as before in order to ensure continuity, but we've added a few modules, which I've just outlined here. There's the online nutrition assessment, which Camille Lassalle is going to be talking about later on this afternoon. We then have some questions on food insecurity, a major topic of people who are having difficulty in having enough money for the food they need. We had new questions on people's expectations about when they were going to retire and also whether they might work beyond the age of 70. We also added some questions on care received at home in a bit more detail than we've done in the past. And we also added an item concerning citizenship in the light of the Brexit continuation of that issue. We, as usual, dropped some items from previous waves, from Wave 8, and reintroduced some other things so that we have some things which are only asked every 4 years compared to every 2 years. So that's really the basic outline of Wave 9. Our normal schedule would have been to start Wave 10 around now in late 2020, but our plans, of course, have been delayed because of the COVID pandemic. And in the interim, we've been carrying out a sub-study to assess the experience of ELSA participants during the last few months. And I'd like to pass over to James Banks to describe this, but just before that, I see that on Slido, there's a question, did Wave 9 include an end-of-life survey? Unfortunately, it didn't, because we didn't have enough money for doing that, but we certainly hope to reintroduce that again in the future. So I'll now pass over to James Banks to tell you about the COVID sub-study.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just set this up. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. So I want to just spend a few minutes telling you a few more details about the COVID sub-study that we've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months, a little bit about the content of that study and some early findings. So as Andrew said, the study is really to try and understand the effect of the COVID pandemic, lockdown and social distancing on the lives of older adults. It's not really a study of COVID, although it will include that, but really the effect of COVID on the lives of older people. We've been very happy to receive funding for this from the ESRC via their COVID-19 rapid response call. And we have funding for essentially 2 waves of data collection, about a 30-minute questionnaire each time. And the questionnaire is administered by web and by telephone for people who can't or are unwilling to complete the questionnaire on the web. As Andrew said, the context for this is that we were in the field the last time we saw our respondents between June 2018 and June 2019, and it would have been around now that we would have been already deep into fieldwork for wave 10. But with the national lockdown taking place on the 20th of March in the UK and running for 6 to 8 weeks through to mid-May, obviously we couldn't do that. And we were engaged in this designing and ultimately funding and getting ethical permission to carry out 2 waves of data collection for all ELSA respondents. The first wave being collected in June, July, and with another wave to be collected in November 2020. And as you'll hear later today, we are still hoping to go into field for wave 10 in the spring 2021. So this gives us a very nice period of time between each assessment, between when we are seeing the respondents over the current period. The format for this was we sent all the ELSA respondents an invitation letter by post. The post letter contained a web survey link that they could click on to open the web survey, or they could book a telephone interview, and then we would follow up with reminders. And we got a very positive response and a very high response rate. So you'll see here that we invited 9,500 older adults into the survey. We got a participation rate of 74%, over 7,000 cases. And the vast majority were willing to complete this survey on the web. 82%, in fact, almost 5,800 cases were carried out on the web. Importantly, particularly for the older population, we did have a large number of people, over 1,200 cases, completing by telephone. And that's a very important part of our design, to be able to contact those part of our sample who were unwilling or unable to complete the survey on the web. The survey, being 30 minutes long, couldn't cover everything that ELSA normally covers, but I've just got a very brief headline summary of the topics. Obviously, since it was already up to 2 to 3 years since we've seen some of our respondents, we first of all had to update some of our data on what they were actually doing, where they were still working, the kind of house that they were living in, the kind of household circumstances. And then we have modules covering essentially the COVID illness and symptoms, both in themselves and in their household and family. Mental health, we had various different measures of anxiety, depression, and well-being. Obviously, labour market, so the effect on those who are working, jobs, pay, and employment. Some questions on physical health, health behaviours. Some various different questions on financial situation more generally than work, so thinking about pensions, wealth, consumption. And finally, a lot of questions, as you might imagine, on social support, social contact, the ability of people to talk to family and friends, and various different loneliness scales, etc. So I think a very broad but a very relevant set of questions. I would say that we developed this instrument in consultation with other UK studies, both the National Core Longitudinal Studies Collaborative that was being organised by Wellcome, which was a collaboration of health longitudinal studies who were having COVID modules, and also with extensive discussions with the investigators from the CLS cohorts and Understanding Society, who were also developing their own COVID modules. So we hope there's some comparability there, but of course, our priority is to prioritize information that is comparable to past information in ELSA studies so that we can understand the events of COVID within the context of the trajectories that we already measure in ELSA before COVID and that we will be measuring after. The first wave of data that was collected in June, July is available for analysis already from the UK Data Service. And the Wave 2 questionnaire will be available in November. Some early descriptive papers actually have already been written, partly for the funding departments. And in fact, if you go to our website, you can see very short headline descriptive papers looking at, for example, the effect of COVID on the financial consequences of older people, various different things about health, volunteering, care, etc., etc. I want to just pull out in 2 minutes a couple of findings from this before I finish, just because I think they're interesting and they show the power of the data. Of course, what we know about COVID is that many older people, particularly with health conditions, were very vulnerable and have been affected by far most from the health side of the pandemic. And so, of course, we see this in our ELSA data. If you see, this is a chart here which looks at so first of all, I should say that almost 1,000 members of our sample had been told by their GP or the NHS that they were in a vulnerable high-risk group and they should think about shielding or isolating. Within this group, about those who were actually shielding or socially self-isolating at home had much higher rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. The high-risk group who were actually not isolating, they were staying at home where possible, but not formally shielding or isolating, had lower rates of depression and anxiety, but still higher than the low-risk group. And in fact, if you look at this table here, you can see a whole raft of various different experiences that show exactly how this pandemic was really having sort of quite large effects on, of course, as one would expect, the older people with vulnerabilities due to health conditions. But that's not the only aspect. And I think if you listen to the debate, you'd think, oh, the COVID has sort of hit the health of the elderly and it's hit the employment of the young. But I don't think that's the whole story. You should remember that 40% of the ELSA sample were actually working before the pandemic, and actually 70% of those under state pension age were in working. So there are sets of older workers who have also been affected by the economic side of the pandemic and the various different effects it's had. As with other working age groups, the pandemic has increased inequalities in the sense that the negative effects have been bigger for those at the lower end of the income, wealth, or earnings distribution than those who are more well off. More importantly, perhaps, older workers have less time to recover before their retirement. So there's a lot of work in past recessions showing that older workers who get separated from their jobs in recessions are much less likely to find new jobs before their retirement than, for example, younger workers. So the permanent effects of the labour market for older workers could be quite negative, certainly for those who are less well off. I've just got one picture here which shows you the difference between the earnings, the employment status in June 2020, and on the left side you will see those who were working before the pandemic and had the lowest earnings. And on the right hand side you'll see those who were working before the pandemic and had the highest earnings. Now let's look at the poorest group first. 44% of that group was still able to be working in the usual way in June. Only 17% were able to work from home. 1/3 were actually on some kind of unpaid or paid leave, that would be including furlough, or if they were self-employed, they weren't working. 3% had actually retired, and 4% were in other, which is basically unemployed, sick, or on permanent sick leave. So that if you contrast that to the experiences of the highest earnings quintile, we had a much higher fraction who were able to work from home and a much reduced fraction who were able to take unpaid leave. So we're seeing these things play out as we go on. I have a more, and what this translates into actually is there is some degree of worry about the future financial situation of our older respondents, even though particularly those who are in work. So here you can see the 38% of the ELSA sample in work, over 1/3 are somewhat worried about their future financial situation, compared with less than 15% of those who've retired. So I think we are seeing within the ELSA sample, we are seeing differences in the way that the pandemic has affected those who are still working versus those who've retired, as well as differences between those with pre-existing health vulnerabilities and those without. So that's really all I'm going to have to say. Looking forward, I think we are constructing the Wave 2 questionnaire, and we're also editing the Wave 10 questionnaire to make it COVID relevant. But really exciting for me is that I'm now looking to see much new analysis by the broader ELSA user community. Some of us are doing stuff already. I hope some of you will be doing some, to really set all the various different measures and COVID experiences in the context of the pre and post-pandemic trajectories that we already have been observing as part of the main ELSA study. So I think that's really where I'm going to end. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James, for outlining that. Very interesting. There are some questions that have come through, which you may partly have answered, but you might like to expand on them a little bit. David Bell has asked about the issue about looking at well-being both before, during, and after the pandemic, and how we can use ELSA data to look at that.
Yes, I think that's a very good question, and we haven't done that yet in the sense of the full trajectory. Obviously, the papers that have currently been written have just been looking at the level in the pandemic, but it's a very important question. We want to ask, what would well-being have been in June 2020 if we hadn't had a pandemic, and then we can compare it to what it was. And then that will tell us essentially the effect of the pandemic on well-being. And that's I've done that analysis for the Understanding Society sample for younger adults. I think that's going to be a great topic to do. So you essentially can use the trajectory of an individual's well-being before, predict where they would have been in June, and then compare where they were in June, and then actually follow that in the longer term. So I absolutely think that will be one of the most interesting aspects of the study. And in fact, that's a methodology that we can do for many things, not just well-being.
Thank you. Another question which has come up is the extent to which we will be repeating the COVID survey questions in Wave 10.
Yes, I think that's what I was talking about, trying to make Wave 10 COVID relevant. We've tried where possible to keep the COVID questions as close or even exactly the same as the ELSA core measures. So for example, our depression scale, our well-being scale are exactly the same as in the core. So yes, we will be repeating those. There are some things like the very lengthy questions on finances, where obviously we have a lot in the core that we could not include in the COVID. But in that situation, I think we're in better shape because the core questions will encompass the COVID questions and more. So absolutely, I think in many senses, we are thinking of the Wave 10 as a continuation of the COVID module, because there's no doubt about it that the effects of COVID are going to be here to stay for many years to come, and we will be wanting to keep measuring them.
Okay, so here's quite a difficult question. Is it possible to use ELSA data to unpick the relative effects on, say, well-being and mental health of the economic shock, the health effects, and social isolation?
I think it is possible in theory, because I think that we have enough data in the COVID modules. So we know, for example, whether someone's lost their job. We know whether or not they've had a death of a spouse. We know whether or not they're constantly in contact with family and friends or not. So I think if we do what I was saying in response to David Bell's question, which is, first of all, we look at the effect of the pandemic on well-being, then I think what we can do is begin to say, well, if we control for the fact that people lost their job, how does that effect change? Or if we control for the fact that people are seeing their friends much more, then I think we will be able to see the effect of the pandemic change. And in some sense, that will help us understand why the pandemic had the effects it did, whether it was due to the economic side of the crisis, the social side, or the health side, or even something else.
Okay. And just one more question I have here, which is, we have two modes of data collection in this survey, the online one and the telephone one. Is there a plan to try and look at those, compare those in any way and see whether there are differences related to mode of data collection?
I think it would be wonderful if there was. I think it's quite, I mean, obviously everybody was doing these surveys in a hurry. And so we didn't have the chance to put in place what you would like to do ideally to answer this question, which would be to randomly allocate some of the people who are willing to participate by web to the telephone. We didn't have the chance or the money to do that. So essentially everybody has chosen their route. And I would say that we designed the questions with having good knowledge of mode effects in general, and we tried to design the questions such that the mode doesn't matter, or it matters as little as it possible. I think in sense of formally evaluating these questions, it might be hard with this particular wave, although there are other studies like, for example, the Understanding Society Innovation Panel, where you could do that sort of thing a bit more formally. But I think it would be a terrific question to look into, is whether or not one can look at mode effects in this data. Thank you.
Okay. And one more economic question, which is what sort of measures of spending were included?
So partly because of the effects of time, our measures of economics were really what you might call subjective or self-reported. So we essentially asked respondents whether they were spending a lot more, a little more, or the same as they were before. We asked about whether or not they were worried about having enough money for food or enough money for other necessities. So really, I think our economic measures look quite different, I think, certainly, other than employment and hours and pay, our economic measures look rather different to a normal ELSA wave. But then, as I said, when we come back in ELSA in April, then we will be able to look at the conventional economic measures again.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, James. That's really interesting. Let's move on now. There was one question which was related to my earlier very brief presentation about wave 9. Somebody asked whether there were dental health measures were included within wave 9, and indeed they were. So we've repeated those in wave 9. Okay, we're moving on now to the 3 presentations which relate to the chapters which were included in the ELSA Wave 9 report. And I'm going to start with Georgia Chetzi, who is a member of the ELSA research team and works at the Cathy Marsh Institute for Social Research at the University of Manchester. And she's going to be talking about social support at older ages. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for the nice introduction. In my presentation today, I will be talking about our recent findings from the research of social support in later life that I've conducted with Dr. Panagiotis Dimakakos from UCL and Professor James Nasr from the University of Manchester. What is interesting here to explore is the different patterns, transitions through time, and any factor, socio-demographic or health-related factors, that can be linked with social support of older adults. Social support has been described as any relationship with another person, often is described as social bond, social contact, and human companionship. Personal relationship with colleagues, friends, extended or immediate family help to build the structure of social support. Convoy theory of social networks are also often been described in the literature. The convoy model of social relationships provide a theoretical framework for both understanding the nature of social networks and social support and the changes that occur over time. According to this model, a person goes through life embedded in a social network made up from family and friends, and these relationships can vary over time and across the life course. But according to this model, the perceived level of support remains the same, stable. However, it is possible that transitions in later life may disrupt established pattern. In order to capture changes within the convoy model, we need to take into account the complex and multidimensional nature of these relationships. Therefore, instead of focusing on describing these relationships, we should focus on categorizing them based on their similarities and differences. Number type of close connections and the positive or negative dimensions of these relations are 2 core issues that should be studied jointly in order to examine the multidimensional nature of social support. So in our research, we aim to answer the following research questions. The first one is about whether there are any distinct classes or groups of ELSA participants who follow specific patterns from their extended and immediate family and friends based on the similarities and differences. Are there changes in these groups through time? Can we identify any movements from one class to another? Can we identify any links between social support and well-being? Markers such as depression, quality of life, and life satisfaction were used to define well-being. And the last one, whether we could find any different patterns of social support associated with employment status, marital status, and health characteristics, such as overall health perception and factional difficulties. We used data from almost 5,000 ELSA participants in wave 4 and wave 9, age 55 and older. Social supports from spouses, children, friends, and family was captured by closeness, quality, positive and negative, quality, relationship, positive or negative, and density. Density has been measured in the questionnaire with questions: how often do you communicate, text, and speak on the phone with your family and friends? We were able to identify 3 classes empirically. A high social support class comprised 65% of our sample, so almost 3,000 people were in this class, who had a high quality relationship with their spouse and children, and 22% of the sample were in the model social support class. They had close relationship with their children, and either they didn't have a spouse, or if they had, they have identified poor bonds with him or her. The third class had the lowest number of participants, almost 700, and they were either had no children or had poor relationship with them and their spouse. And this was the lowest social support class. To answer our research question regarding changing in classes over time, we implemented latent transition analysis, and we found that overall, no great movements between the classes have been occurred during the course of almost 10 years. 13% of those participants have been moved from the high social support to the moderate one, and only 3% from those in the low social support groups moved to the highest social support group. Participants in the highest social support class had lower levels of depression compared to those participants in the other 2 classes, and had higher levels in the markers of quality of life and quality and satisfaction in life. When we examined the socio-demographic and health-related factors and its relations with social support classes, we found that those being retired and unemployed were more likely to be in the lower social support latent class. What is interesting also is single and never married participants were less likely to be in the higher social support class compared to the married counterparts, and less likely to move a better class over time. And finally, those who perceived their health as being poor and were experiencing factional difficulties were also less likely to belong to a higher social support class and less likely to move a better class over time. To sum up, we categorized ELSA participants into 3 different social support classes, and we found that the majority of ELSA participants were identified as being the highest social support class with close connection with spouses, children, extended family, and friends. Using latent class analysis, we're able to examine changes over time and to find that only a small proportion of participants changed class within 10 years. Being employed, having a partner, and maintaining good health were key components to predict strong relationships through the course of the study and time. Since ELSA is an aging study, it would be very interesting to examine whether transitions to retirement, widowhood, or ill health can predict changes in the social support, and how these changes affect well-being in later ages. We have many ideas for future research in our mind at the moment, but the key finding from this part of research was that central elements of older people's life are linked with social support, and it's an overall complex matter that requires attention. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you very much, Georgia. We have time for a few questions about your presentation. And one of the questions is whether there's any thoughts about linking the COVID-19 outcomes with these different social class groups that you've been identifying.
Yes, yes. This has been on my mind since the ELSA released the COVID data, that it could be, we can find strong relationship between the pre-pandemic era and a post-pandemic era, or during the pandemic era, with social support and COVID. So yeah, I hypothesized that there would be changes since self-isolating or shielding could have an impact on how these connections between friends and family have changed during the pandemic. So,
okay,
yeah.
thank you. So another question that's come in is, within your high social support group, were there interesting differences between those people who had primary relationships with friends or with family, or those sorts of things?
So overall, we didn't find, we found that relationship with the spouse and the children created the distinction between the classes. So we found no significant differences. No, I wouldn't talk about statistics, but we couldn't find differences within the class, between the classes in terms of family and friends. So I would say that having a spouse or not having a spouse, or having children or not having children, were important components in our class models.
So was there any way of sort of differentiating this very large high support group, the 65%, into subgroups, or not?
It was only based on the spouse and children, whether you have a spouse or whether you had children. Overall, for friends and family, extended family, the results were similar.
Right, okay. And so another question is whether there are changes in person's circumstances, I guess things like financial circumstances or life events, that correlate with the changes in social support later in life for those people who do change.
So we found that only for now we're able to examine employment status. So we found no significant difference in wave through time in wave 9. So we found some changes in wave 4, but then after 10 years, we found no significant differences in terms of employment status. We found
Right.
some marital status and health-related characteristics. However, it's the way we captured the transition to. We didn't capture the transition to employment. We captured only transition to social class. So maybe if we can capture the transition through retirement or employment or re-employment, maybe you can find something more interesting.
Okay. Okay. And another question which is related to the COVID experience, do you think that these different aspects of social support might help us understand the impact of COVID on factors such as loneliness? Yes,
I think so, yes. So especially if we can measure the changes, we can see how much the COVID impacted on loneliness.
Right. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much indeed. That's terrific. There's another question just come in that I'll just answer as we transition to the next presentation. Ella Mesame has asked about the blood data from wave 9. There are blood measures taken in wave 9 which have been collected. They haven't yet gone into the archive, but we expect that to happen pretty soon. So that information will be available and will obviously be very helpful for many different studies. Let's move on then. And the next presentation is from Heidi Karjalainen, who is a research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. She's working on pensions and savings for retirement. And her presentation is about state pension entitlements. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrew. So I will be presenting the ELSA economics chapter today. So we've looked at people's awareness of their state pension entitlements. So this was joint work with Rowena Crawford, who's also at the IFS. So to start with an introduction, the UK government provides people with a state pension, and the current full rate is about £9,000 a year. So this is about a third of median incomes in the UK at the moment. So it's quite a low replacement rate. So for most people, in order to ensure adequate income and consumption in retirement, they'll have to top this up with some private saving. In order for people to make appropriate choices when it comes to their saving, they need to understand what their future state pension entitlements will be. So what we've done in this chapter is we've looked at people's awareness of their state pension entitlements. So the two aspects being state pension age and state pension income. So we've looked at both how this has changed over time and how this changes between different groups. And this is particularly interesting right now, as we can look at how awareness has been affected by changes to state pension policy. In the last decade, we've seen the state pension age starting to increase, first for women and also for men. And also we saw the introduction of the new flat rate pension in 2016. So looking at the question about state pension age. So in ELSA, for women since wave 3 and for men since wave 5, we've had this question, what is your state pension age? So we can compare this self-reported state pension age to the actual state pension age that we've calculated. And when we're looking at in wave 9, we're looking at knowledge of state pension age among those age 55 to state pension age. We can see that about 60%, so a majority of people are correct about their state pension age within 3 months, but there is a significant minority of people who either overestimate, underestimate, or don't know their state pension age. So obviously this is the group that we might be worried about. If people don't know the age at which they will start receiving state pension income, it's quite difficult for them to make any plans about when and how they might retire and how much they should save privately for their retirement. We also looked at this splitting by actual state pension age. So we can see that those whose actual state pension age is slower, so those who at the time of the survey were older, their knowledge on average is better. And we also found that this is not only true in wave 9, but this is also true within cohorts. So as a cohort approaches their state pension age, their knowledge seems to improve. There's this one slightly different group where knowledge is worse, and this is the group whose state pension age is between 66 and 67. So those people have a bit more complicated state pension age and seem to, on average, overestimate their state pension age. So if we then turn into looking at state pension income, in ELSA, people are asked, what is the maximum amount of income you expect to receive from your state pension, and also what's the minimum amount of income? So again, looking at wave 9 and respondents aged 55 to state pension age, we can see that 36% of people were able to give an answer to this question where they gave a different maximum and minimum value. About 28% of people gave a certain value, so they gave the same maximum and minimum value. And about 36% of people, when asked what's the maximum and minimum amount that you expect to receive from state pension income, said, I don't know, to either one or both of these questions. So obviously this is again quite worrying, because it'll be very difficult for these people to make decisions about their retirement saving when they don't have a sense of how much they'll actually receive from the state. And also this is perhaps a little bit surprising, because the wave 9 took place in 2018-19, so this was already 2-3 years after the introduction of the new flat rate pension that was meant to make it simpler for people to have an understanding or have an idea of how much they would receive from retirement. Obviously, we might also be worried about these people who did give a range or gave a certain answer if they were wrong. In the report, you'll see more detail on this, but we found that on average, people, especially when they're close to state pension age, they slightly underestimate their state pension income, but are on average quite close to the actual value. So just to conclude, as I said, there's a lot more detail on this in our report, but what our chapter shows is that there are a lot of people who do know, or a majority of people who do know what their state pension age is and what their state pension, and can give a range for what they think their state pension income will be. And this is in particular true for those who are close to retirement. Even then, there is a very significant minority of people who remain unaware of what their state pension entitlements will be. So a key challenge for the government is to ensure that people both know what their state pension entitlements will be, and when there are changes to state pension policy, a key policy challenge is to ensure that people understand those changes to policy and whether they're affected by them. So that's it from me. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
So thank you very much, Heidi. That is very interesting. There's some questions here that I'd like to transfer to you. One of the questions is what type of people know their pension details or don't know them, I suppose? Is it related to education, to self-employment status, those sorts of things, cognitive function perhaps?
Yes, so definitely, well, all of those things. So we did look at both, when it comes to state pension age, we found that people who have more wealth, people who are members of a private pension scheme, and also people who are owner-occupiers, so who own the house that they live in. All of those people were more likely to know their state pension age. So this sort of suggests that those people are already thinking about their private pension saving. So it seems that they're also were more likely to have looked up what their state pension entitlements would be. We did also find that, as you might expect, people with no qualifications were more likely to say that they don't know, and also with the cognitive ability, people with lower cognitive ability were more likely to say that they or were more likely to be unable to give a range of what they would receive from their state pension. Another interesting one actually was the internet usage. So again, people who don't regularly use the internet were more likely to say that they don't know what their state pension income will be. So obviously that's a very important point from the perspective of policy, where it's not enough that we have these internet tools that tell people what their state pension income and state pension age will be, but the policies have to be targeted also towards these groups that might not use the internet, for example.
Okay, that's related to, I guess, another question which has come in, which is, do we know in ELSA how people obtain the information about their pension? What the sources are that they're using?
So there are some questions, and not all of the questions are in all of the waves. So we've sort of looked at some things. People are asked about whether they've used an independent financial advisor, for example. We didn't actually find much of an effect when we looked at the effect of that. There was also in an earlier wave, there were questions about when DWP was sending letters to people, kind of telling them what their state pension income will be. Unfortunately, that hasn't been included in a while, but we did find that in those waves, for those people who said that they had received that letter, although many of them had requested it, but when those people who said that they'd received the letter, they were more likely to know about their state pension entitlements. But yeah, so maybe surprisingly, the effect of an independent financial advisor didn't seem, at least in this question, didn't seem that important.
Rather startling finding that.
Well, maybe they know more about the private pension, but maybe the state doesn't have so much effect on the state pension knowledge.
Let me just ask one last question, which is, has people's knowledge about the state pension age changed over time? We were looking obviously at wave 9 here.
Yeah. So basically, it has changed over time. So as I said, if we look at within cohort, we can see that people, as they age, as they approach their state pension age, their knowledge improves. But also when we're looking at, when we're comparing younger cohorts to older cohorts, the data suggests that there is improvement over time as well. So the younger cohorts today have better knowledge than the older cohorts had at the same age, especially among those who've been affected by the state pension age increases. So it looks like there is some improvement in knowledge across the board.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Haley. Let's move now to the third of these chapter presentations, and it's from Darina Kadar. Darina is a cognitive neuropsychologist and an epidemiologist working in the ELSA team at UCL. And her presentation focuses on recent work in ELSA on cognitive aging and dementia. Thank you, Darina.
Thank you for the presentation. I am delighted to present the latest results from Cognitive Impairment and Dementia chapter. And this work has been conducted with my colleague, Dr. Jessica Abel and Professor Andrew Steptoe. So we aim to examine the prevalence of cognitive impairment and dementia in England using the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol, which is a new substudy introduced in English Longitudinal Study of Aging, which has also facilitated a crosswalk diagnostic algorithm between HCAP and the latest wave of ELSA, which is wave 9. HCAP is an international project funded by NIA, aiming to implement a similar study protocol consisting of various neuropsychological tests in the HRS family of studies around the world. And we are delighted to be able to add ELSA HCAP to the international map of HCAP studies that have already completed one wave of data collection. HCAP was administered in ELSA between waves 8 and 9, more exactly in 2018. The study was comprised between 2 interviews, one with the respondent and the second one with the informant, which was either a family member or a knowledgeable friend. We generated an overall cognition score from all the objective cognitive tests included in the HCAP battery of tests, except the MMSE, which was separately used to determine a dementia diagnosis algorithm. This algorithm was created using the DSM criteria, and it was first implemented by CIFA Studies 1 and 2 in Cambridge. Using this diagnosis algorithm, we classified all ELSA HCAP participants according to their medical records, MMSE performance using a score of 24 as a threshold, subjective memory complaints, overall cognitive performance, and functional impairments on ADL and EADL. As you can see in this path diagram, the red arrows means that the criteria was not met, while the green arrows represent that the criteria was fulfilled. And following this path algorithm, we obtain an initial classification of 7 cognitive groups, and we further regroup them into 3, which were no cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia. Furthermore, a crosswalk prediction algorithm was derived between the ELSA HCAP 3 groups obtained and ELSA wave 9 in a sample of participants age 60 and older, using several indicators available to us, such as age, sex, education, and all the cognitive measures available at wave 9. The highest probability score was selected for each participant, and a group diagnosis probability was assigned to each ELSA participant at wave 9. So using this prediction scoring, we estimated that about 72% of this algorithmic sample at wave 9 had no cognitive impairment, 23% of the sample were classified with cognitive impairment, and about 5% with dementia. We are also interested in the biopsychosocial determinants of cognitive impairment and dementia. And therefore, we examine the longitudinal association between emerging cardiovascular risk factors such as high blood pressure, diabetes, and low physical inactivity, psychosocial risk factors such as depressive symptoms and loneliness, and lastly, socioeconomic and neighborhood risk factors such as geographical region, which all ascertained at wave 4, in relation to our cognitive outcomes, which are cognitive impairment and dementia, ascertained at wave 9, ensuring a follow-up period of 10 years for these longitudinal associations. The results are presented here with red bars indicating relative risk ratio for cognitive impairment in the first column and for dementia in the second column. And in these models, we control for age square, sex, marital status, household wealth, and cardiovascular disease. Our results indicate that physical inactivity at wave 4 represents a strong determinant of dementia risk at wave 9. Moreover, we found an increased risk for cognitive impairment at wave 9 for those with elevated depressive symptoms 10 years earlier, while greater loneliness at baseline was predictive of an increased risk for both cognitive impairment and dementia almost a decade later. Lastly, we found no association between geographical region and these cognitive outcomes. Our findings provide further evidence for the impact of the psychosocial risk factor on neurocognitive disorders in later life, and this is consistent with the results from a recent Lancet report by Livingstone and colleagues. In terms of implication, we've seen that loneliness and depressive symptoms represent important psychosocial determinants of cognitive impairment and dementia. So targeting these aspects in addition to lifestyle behavior should be considered a priority for maintaining optimal cognitive health for older adults. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge all the HCAP investigator, Andrew Steptoe, Carol Brain, David Batty, David Lurin, our collaborator from HRS, David Weir, Ken Langa, Fiona Matthews from UK, from University of Nottingham, the funder, my colleague Jessica Abel, and Nuts and team for data collection, as well to all study participants for their time and commitment to the study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darina, for that interesting presentation about cognitive function. The question that's come up is, how do the levels of cognitive function you found in ELSA compare with those in other HCAP countries?
We haven't yet start to make comparison between different countries. We just released actually the data and completed our first investigation within ELSA HCAP. So far we know that most of our HCAP analyses are comparable with HRS preliminary results from our first set of comparison, but the data is not yet published. And so far we have made comparison with the data published from the UK with the CIFA studies, and we've seen comparable results, just slightly lower prevalences of cognitive impairment and dementia compared to CIFAS 2, but more close to CIFAS 1.
Thank you very much. So another question that's come up is whether this cognitive status classification into normal, mild cognitive impairment and dementia, is that available to users?
We just complete this work for the chapters. I mean, the methodology used has been replicated from a paper which was published in European Journal of Epidemiology, who is the algorithm implemented in CIFAS. So everyone could follow the methodology described both in their paper and in our chapter, but we haven't released yet the cognitive groups. We just released the HCAP data.
Okay. So another question is the relationship between socioeconomic factors and the risk of dementia. What do we find in this analysis?
We've seen so far that both education and level of household wealth were linked with increased prevalence of cognitive impairment and dementia. This resonates with our previous work done conducted in ELSA, when we just look at the role of these factors in relation to dementia diagnosis. And this work has been published, and investigating the prevalence in ELSA HCAP, we've seen the same pattern with people with lower level of education having an increased risk of cognitive impairment and dementia.
Okay. Another question that's just come in is whether poor sleep quality and quantity was independent of depressive symptoms in relation to dementia. Do we know this?
Sleep quality, we haven't controlled yet in none of this analysis included in the chapter. We haven't controlled for sleep quality, but this data is available at wave 3 and 4, so definitely a scope for further analysis. So far, as we look in previous data, we have seen a relationship between cognitive functioning and sleep quality, and this work has been published, but not recent investigation with cognitive impairment and dementia. Further work.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we have now a few minutes for some further questions and comments on all the Wave 9 report chapters. So if I could ask Heidi and Georgia to join us again, and we could try and field some more questions for any of you. And the first one I have here is actually for Heidi. And it is, have you looked into sort of need to know the importance of state pension for people and whether that is a relevant factor in understanding?
So I assume by what they mean by this question is that for some people, state pension is more important because that'll be the majority of their income in retirement, and for some people it might be a less important factor. Well, so we didn't look at this sort of explicitly, but as I said, what we found is that people with lower levels of wealth, people who don't have a private pension, those people are less likely to know about their state pension, even though those are the kind of people who their state pension will be probably one of their main income streams in retirement. So yeah, that's definitely something that we found that that those people for whom state pension will be most important in retirement are actually the least likely to have accurate knowledge or have that kind of knowledge. So yeah, that's what we found.
So it's discouraging in a way.
Yes.
That it's that way around.
Mm.
Okay. There's a question for Georgia here, which is really it's about the convoy hypothesis. Do you think this holds, or are there important qualifications about this idea?
So we found no great differences through time. So the overriding impression might be one of stability, so that the convoy hypothesis holds. But there are important exceptions that might be missed with an on-average analysis. So the lateral transition analysis allows us to show that a significant majority of participants experience major changes in the type of social support. We have also been able to begin to identify the factors like employment status, marital status, and health-related characteristics that predict such changes in the future. But future research is suggesting that to be more precise, we need to identify type of transitions to understand the complexity of the matter. Because if you have like a straight line, like, yes, we haven't detected any changes, but the nature of these changes needs to be examined, how these relationships have changed explicitly. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. And the question for Darina is about whether we've looked at how cognitive impairment changes over time. It obviously declines with age on average, but do we know much about the rates of change in different groups?
Actually, for examining cognitive impairment, only this specialized substudy, which is ELSA HCAP, really offers the opportunity to classify people from normal cognition on this cognitive spectrum towards dementia, where we identify now cognitive impairment with functional impairment, without functional impairment. So unfortunately, the previous waves of ELSA, where we benefited of several cognitive tests, we don't have a very clear understanding who we can identify as mild cognitive impairment, more than we can say a higher level of cognition, but or perhaps suboptimal or lower cognition. So just this specialized study really offering neuropsychological tools such as MMSE, where there are recognized thresholds for identifying people with cognitive impairment and dementia, really offer us for first time to be more clear on who is at risk of cognitive impairment and dementia, and perhaps repeating longitudinally with an HCAP interview, we will be able to consider in time who is progressing and for the period between the transition between normal cognition and cognitive impairment.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question really for all of you, which is that somebody has noted that there is some links between these things: social support, social isolation, cognitive function, and knowing about your state pension age. So this might have implications for policymakers. I don't know if any of you would like to tackle that particular thorn, nettle. How do you think these things might be linked?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is definitely, I mean, it's a, yes, it's as an observation, I guess more than a question, that yes, there are links, and this makes it very, very difficult for policymakers, you know, when a lot of, especially when a lot of this focus, when it comes to, well, obviously my example being the pensions policy, a lot of the focus on that is improving the ways in which people can find out about these things online, or and things like that, which aren't then actually available for people who either don't have the support networks to help them do that, or don't have the cognitive ability to do that. So yes, this is definitely a challenge for policymakers.
Yeah, and we've seen also in relation to cognitive impairment and dementia that loneliness and social isolation is actually a risk factor. So perhaps considering the level of engagement of older people, perhaps retirement, it's actually not a good thing for everybody, because being in work provides more social network, more social engagement and brain activity, which are all influential for maintaining cognitive health for as long as possible. But obviously, it's not so easy to make a recommendation for everyone to work longer, because such policies are always controversial. But I think to allow people flexibility, and if they're in good health, to maintain engagement for as long as possible.
And all these matters could be worse now during the pandemic or after the pandemic. So we have this, all the dimensions that join together, and it could be challenging for the policymakers, especially if we want to create more efficient policies from now on. Excuse me. Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, let's close this session now. Thank you very much to the three of you, and we'll move on now to two other aspects of data that were collected or analyzed within Wave 9. And the first is a presentation from ELSA Ajnakina on the genetic data in ELSA. ELSA is a genetic epidemiologist and biostatistician who works at UCL and King's College London, and she's responsible for the genetic data in ELSA, and she's going to tell us about the polygenic risk scores that are going to be available now in the study.
Perfect, Andrew. Thank you so much for the introduction and for this opportunity to tell you about the polygenic scores analysis and other genetic work that we have been doing in ELSA. So the polygenic scores combine the additive effect of common genetic variants scattered across the whole genome. They are specific to each individual and represent an individual load for the common genetic variant for a given trait that is under study. The polygenic score approach has been instrumental for highlighting that many health outcomes, such as BMI, diabetes, and even dementia, as well as behavioral traits, such as smoking-related behaviors, for example, are polygenic, meaning the expression is influenced or is associated with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of common genetic markers that are of a very small magnitude. So polygenic scores have also been instrumental in highlighting that many diseases or many traits have an overlapping, but though to varying degree, molecular underpinnings. For example, in ELSA, we have shown that while genetic susceptibility to schizophrenia conveys developmental cognitive deficit, it was not associated with an ongoing cognitive decline. And this was an important finding because it just questioned the whole schizophrenia illness being genetically predetermined as a progressive brain disease. And so, like, for these reasons, for these full potentials, polygenic risk scores are being increasingly used to predict not only a risk for a disease, but also increase our knowledge of how these diseases develop. So in ELSA, we have prepared and made available polygenic scores for 55 human conditions, behaviors, and traits. And these are listed in this table. So as you can see, we have polygenic scores for different personality types, behavioral traits, adult psychopathology, and even biological outcomes. And we have also prepared a detailed document describing the methods employed to create these polygenic scores, which can be obtained from the ELSA website or by contacting me if it's an easier option. So now just a quick note about the methodology that we utilized to create these polygenic scores. So these scores were created using methods as they were described in health and retirement study. And we did this in order to harmonize the research across age-related longitudinal studies by adopting the same or consistent methodology for creating the polygenic scores. These scores are also regularly updated. So as soon as the new or larger summary statistics are released, I create newer version of the scores. And if ELSA happened to contribute to the consortia, like it was the case with the general cognition for 2018, for example, I always request the study leads to repeat the analysis, removing ELSA data, and provide the updated summary statistics, which are then used to create the scores. So just to reassure everyone that the polygenic scores in ELSA do not contain the ELSA data within them. So in addition to polygenic scores, we have also other genetic data prepared and available for researchers, which they can obtain either through the European Genome Phenome Archives, the ELSA website, or by contacting me. And these data include the genome-wide genotypes, raw, and by raw I mean it's not quality controlled or prepared. Nothing has been done to it to prepare it for further analysis. If the researchers are not able to carry out quality control steps of the GWAS data due to logistical reasons or other reasons, we have quality control GWAS ready and available for them as well. And here, it's important to note that the quality control steps of the GWAS were exactly the same as they were described for health and retirement study as well. And we did this in order to facilitate opportunities for cross-national analysis. We also, I have also imputed the data as well, and we have GWAS imputed to 2 different reference panels, like 1000 Genome Project and haplotype reference consortium. And so the researchers can download or obtain either of these datasets depending on their research preferences. So in addition to the polygenic scores and GWAS data that we have available, we also do a lot of additional work on using genetic data in ELSA. For example, we do create polygenic scores using perhaps less widely or not as widely utilized packages as PRECISE, such as LT-PRED or polygenic risk or continuous shrinkage, which is my favorite package to use for polygenic scores. We also do, we run genome-wide association analysis using SNP test and SAGE, again, depending on the researcher's preferences, and prepare the summary statistics, which are then become part of larger collaborations or larger meta-analysis of GWAS data. And the most recent one that I have done was on dogs, so that's dog ownership. So yes, so we don't really have any constraints of the phenotype that we are investigating. And in addition to that, we do a lot of estimates of SNP heritability, which is a different way of estimating the genetic ability attributable to genes rather than using polygenic scores. And we also do genetic annotation, which tells us what genes within what variants in association with a particular outcome, what they actually do and how they are actually expressed. And so all of this is done as either part of collaboration or on request. So I would be happy to hear from anyone who might be interested to work on this together and develop different ideas using the ELSA data. So this was just a very quick overview of the genetic data and work that we are doing in the ELSA study. If you happen to have any other questions or you would like to learn more, please do not hesitate to contact me at any time. I will be more than happy to hear from you and help you. Or you can go and have a look at the ELSA website for more details if it's an easier option for you. But other than that, that's all from me, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Was I right in hearing that that there is some genetic association, genetic determination of dog ownership? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, 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 there is.
I see.
Actually, it was fascinating. You know, one of many reasons why I love doing this work is because we're learning so much more about the genetic mechanisms behind things that we didn't even think were genetically driven. You know, it came as a surprise to many of us when they showed that educational attainment was pretty genetically influenced more than environmental factors to some extent. And now I'm discovering that dog ownership is driven by genetic variants as well, which ELSA has explored as well. And confirmed those findings, yeah. Okay,
so a question that's come in is whether we calculate the polygenic scores only for people of European descent, or
that's true. That's true. It's not just the characteristic of the ELSA study. It's actually predominantly one of the dominating weaknesses of the genetic work in general that is being done at the moment. So the majority of about 79% that was shown in 2019, that up to 79% of all genome-wide association studies are conducted on people of European ancestry. Although European ancestry composes only 17 or 16% of the global population. Because polygenic scores are dependent on the GWAS results, summary statistics, that means that polygenic scores are largely applicable to individuals of European ancestry. And what we have shown in King's as well is that using polygenic score of European ancestry and applying it to people of non-European ancestry actually doesn't work. Polygenic scores don't explain any variants at all. And we learned that lesson hard way, of course. We know when the paper was prepared and had to be rewritten. It was so yeah. It's unfortunate at the moment, but there are a lot of a lot of studies being conducted in US, in particular, when they're creating collaborations to do genome-wide association studies of non-European ancestry. And what we are also seeing that a lot of genome-wide association studies are coming from China as well. So yeah, we're beginning to see this genetic diversity, but we don't see it in polygenic score analysis just yet. They haven't reached us yet.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And I should say that the polygenic scores which ELSA has developed are about to come out in the archive, and so people can certainly download them from there, or else they could contact ELSA and get hold of those directly. But we're very keen that people start using those more. Thank you very much, ELSA.
Okay.
Let's move on then to the next presentation, which is from Camille Lassalle. Camille is a cardiovascular and nutritional epidemiologist, and she worked for several years at UCL on ELSA, but is now working in the cardiovascular and nutrition group at the IMIM Research Institute in Barcelona. And she's going to tell us about the nutrition data collected in ELSA. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you very much for allowing me to present some nutritional data today. So as you said in the introduction, this is a new feature at wave 9 of ELSA, the nutritional assessment. So I will tell you a bit about which questionnaire we use to assess dietary intake in ELSA at this wave, and some descriptive results that are all in the report. So as you can imagine, assessing dietary intake is quite a tricky task, especially in large-scale population cohorts. And what we decided to do at this wave of ELSA is to use actually a hybrid instrument called the Oxford Web Questionnaire, which is online and self-administered. And what it does is that it asks the participant to report all their food and drinks over the last 24 hours. So that would be quite similar to what we call a 24-hour recall, which is usually administered by a dietitian or by a nutritionist. But here is self-administered and online. And what is particular of this method, of this questionnaire, is that it's actually a list of 21 food groups. So it's not like an open question. Rather, it has a finite list of 21 food groups, which makes it very handy and relatively quick to fill in for the participant. It's still between 15 and 20 minutes because you have to answer all of your intake from the previous day. And another great asset of this questionnaire is that it has been developed very recently. So it's with an up-to-date food list and the nutrient database that is linked to it as well. And if you want actually to have a better idea of the usual intake of somebody, you want to have more than one period of 24 hours. So in the case of ELSA, we could administer the questionnaire 2 times on 2 non-consecutive days, which gives a better idea of usual dietary intake. So these are a few screenshots of the questionnaire, which shows that it's a very user-friendly and secure interface with photographs. And only if the participant reports some intake then of one specific food group, in this case of the photo you see the meat, then only if intake is reported, there will be an extended list of food items, specific food items. But otherwise, if there is no consumption, then it's pretty quick. You can go straight to the next food group. And again, only in the case of consumption, in this here in this example, the participant says that they had 1 bread roll. You can add some more detail on flour type or extras that were on the bread. So this is the overview of the questionnaire. And what kind of results do we have from this questionnaire? Well, we have it at several levels. At the food group level, where how much of this each of these food groups do the participants consume, and this is translated into nutritional intake, so macro and micronutrients. And I will show you only a selected amount of data, because you can imagine there is a lot to describe, and everything is in the report. But let me start off with so at the broader scale, which is the food groups. And I selected fruit and vegetables because it's one key indicator of the quality of the diet. So you can see here the numbers. There were over 2,200 men and 2,600 women who answered the questionnaires on 2 non-consecutive days. And what we see overall for fruit and vegetable intake is that women tend to eat more fruit and veg than men, and men that are a bit older eat more than men who are younger. And we can, so that would be the graph on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side panel, you see the consumption of fruit and vegetable by wealth category. And we see quite a clear trend, a clear wealth gradient, where people in the lowest wealth quintile consuming less fruit and vegetable than the people in the highest wealth quintiles. And here are some results on 3 other key food groups that also reflect on the quality of the diet. It's fish, red and processed meat, and soft drinks. Again, I'm showing you here the results separately from men and women across wealth categories. And we can see the same kind of trend that we saw in the previous slide for fruit and vegetables, that let's say unhealthy food groups, which are red and processed meat and soft drinks, tend to be, the intake is lower in the highest wealth categories compared to the lowest. And for fish, there is a slightly higher intake, especially for women, in the highest wealth category compared to the lowest. And how does it translate in terms of macronutrients? Here, just to mention the total energy intake, we see that obviously men consume more calories per day than women, which is obviously expected. And here are the breakdown into the macronutrients, which are protein, carbohydrates, fat, and alcohol, separately for men and women, and across all age categories that are represented in ELSA. And what we see in this graph is it's actually quite the same on every column. So it's quite stable across categories and between men and women. What we observe is that alcohol intake is slightly greater in men than women, and that as people age, they tend to consume slightly less protein, but more carbohydrates. And another macronutrient, which is a key indicator of diet quality, and that it doesn't carry calories with it, but it's obviously an indicator of diet quality, is dietary fiber. And just for the record, the reference nutrient intake in the nutritional guidelines in the UK is of 30 grams of fiber per day. And we can see that on average, the men and women consume between 15 and 16 grams per day. So pretty much half of what is recommended. And on this slide, you see that this intake was different between the wealth categories, with, again, which obviously mirrors what was seen for the fruit and vegetable consumption, higher fiber intake in the highest wealth group compared to the lowest. And in terms of micronutrients, this is a selection of 4 micronutrients which reflect diet quality, which are calcium, potassium, magnesium, and vitamin C across wealth categories. And we see again the same clear pattern of gradient between across wealth categories from lowest to highest, with people in the highest wealth category having a more adequate and greater nutrient diversity than in the lowest wealth quintiles. So to conclude, we see that in terms of macronutrients, there was a pretty similar breakdown between men and women and across age groups. We see that men consume more alcohol and red meat than women, and on the contrary, women eat more fruit and vegetables. The average dietary fiber intake is way below the recommendation, and there was a clear gradient by wealth, with healthier diet and greater micronutrient intake consumed in the highest compared to the lowest wealth categories in ELSA. That would be it for the description of the nutritional intake, and now I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. So questions come in, which is something I was interested in as well, is we've used this Oxford Web questionnaire. Obviously, there are some much better established, long established food frequency questionnaires and so forth. So has this questionnaire been used before, and why was it chosen?
Well, the questionnaire has already been used in very large scale studies in the UK Biobank and in the Million Women study. So it's a very, it has been now used quite widely. There was a few validation studies, comparison study for this questionnaire in terms of acceptability and how does it compare to the established questionnaires. In that case, actually, the reference instrument was 24-hour recall by a dietitian, and every time it showed good acceptability and pretty valid, acceptable validity compared to the reference instrument. And last year, there was a validation study against biomarkers, which actually showed better results than the well-established food frequency questionnaires, for example. So it is a very good instrument with all of the limitations that we are aware of, because it is inherent to self-reported research, but it is actually an instrument of good quality, and it has been used in very large-scale studies.
Thank you. So a couple of questions have come in, which I'm sure are not things we can answer at the moment, but potentially we could. And one is the issue of your wealth gradient. Is that to do with better knowledge among the wealthier people, or is it that their financial resources allow them to eat a healthier diet?
Well, I'm happy to answer that. Just, it's something that I'm just assuming. We didn't explore that specifically here for these results more in depth, but it has to do with access to healthier food in terms of the environment and the personal assets and the personal wealth of the participants, because we know it has been quite established that healthier food, nutrient-rich but energy, not energy-dense food are more expensive and sometimes less accessible in neighborhoods that are more deprived, for example.
Okay. What about the difference between single people and married couples? Are we able to say anything about that?
That is a very good question, and I think it will be very interesting to do it. I don't have the results at hand now, but I think it will be great for future descriptions of the results.
And another issue that somebody has raised is about geographical variations. Obviously, we have ELSA people right through the country. Do we know anything about that so far?
I will be very happy to look into this. I think they are great questions. It will be fascinating, and for sure for the next report. And supposedly we will implement the instrument in wave 11, so it will be probably a better way to present the results. So those are great suggestions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Camille. Again, this is a new set of data that we're very keen that people try to use, and we'd be very happy if they do use that in the future. And I think there are many opportunities within that. I'd like to turn now to the last issue, which we wanted to cover today. Just talk briefly about wave 10. And I'm going to start by just saying something about this to begin with. And then I'm going to hand over to Martin Wood. So the intention is to start fieldwork for wave 10 in April 2021. This is a bit of a delay from our original plan. As I mentioned right at the beginning, we had hoped to start in October 2020, but we're obviously not able to do that. But we hope to be able to start in 2021. There are going to be issues about mode of data collection, which Martin is going to talk about. And we are doing quite a large boost of the sample, refreshment sample, including a large ethnic minority boost, if we can as well, which Martin may touch on. In terms of content, the main things that I think are new, which we'd like to just mention to you, is first of all, we're going to include accelerometers for the first time on a large scale in order to look both at physical activity and objective measures of sleep. These are going to be carried out on approximately half the sample, and the way we're thinking about that is in relation to the nurse visits, so that the nurses would put these on, but it's possible that we could do this remotely as well. And people will wear the accelerometers for 7 days, and we will use those data to get some objective information about physical activity and sleep. And we've been able to do this because of some additional funding which we've obtained from the ESRC, which is actually part of an ELSA Charles, that's a Chinese study comparison. So they're going to be doing something similar so that we can look at this across nations. The other main changes in terms of new content are detailed here. We're going to be putting in some items concerning social prescribing that has become an important issue over the last couple of years, though obviously the COVID pandemic has disrupted many of the plans for the social prescribing rollout, but we'd like to see what is happening there. Work patterns at older ages, we're aware of the changes in the way in which older people are working, that they may be working on a number of different jobs, they may be in some kind of gig economy kind of job, and we need more information about those issues. We're planning more extensive measures of discrimination and abuse, in particular in relation to age and gender, and also racial abuse as well. We have had some rather broad measures of those features in the past, but we're going to expand on that and go into those issues in more detail. And also we're going to go into more detail of measures of mental health. In the past, we've had quality of life and depression, but not other aspects of mental health measured in any standardized way. So that is something that we want to try and bring into the next wave. And barriers to digital inclusion is a particularly important issue at the moment because of the COVID pandemic, of course, but is generally important as well. We have introduced now quite a lot of measures about why people are using the internet, and more importantly, what is preventing them from using the internet more. And so we will be developing that area as well. So those will be the major changes in content, I think. But obviously we also have issues to do with mode of data collection. So I'm going to turn now to Martin Wood, who is the Director of Longitudinal Surveys at NatCen and a member of the ELSA management group, who's going to say a little bit more about the practicalities of data collection in Wave 10. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little more detail about the data collection plans for Wave 10, in particular the refreshment that Andrew mentioned, but also how COVID-19 is affecting our plans and what the future might hold. So ELSA's overall design at Wave 10 is very consistent with that of Wave 9, and indeed previously. The sample that we issue for fieldwork will consist of existing ELSA sample members, plus any new partners they may have by that point. It will also include a refreshment at this wave, and for a wider age group than we've seen in the past, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. It's an in-home interview, which is obviously relevant for thinking about COVID-19. It's an 80 minutes interview on average. It's a lot longer for some people, and again, that's relevant when thinking about what are the modes we might be able to move to at some point. There'll be a nurse visit for half the sample, as we've done since Wave 8. The second half of the nurse visits will be carried out the following wave, and those data can then be brought together for the full sample, as we've done in the data for Wave 9 and 8. And we also have a self-completion, a paper self-completion, and the ODQ is going to happen in Wave 10 as well, as we've talked about. So just to focus on that refreshment, it's a bit different and a bit more substantial in Wave 10. And that chart here illustrates why. It shows the shortfall in the Wave 8 achieved cross-sectional sample. So weights are quite high for the younger age groups. The pink bars here are the unweighted sample numbers, and the green are the weighted. So the weights are doing a lot of work at that younger age group. And this imbalance will affect ages 50 to 64 by the time of wave 10. And this has kind of come about because there are effectively insufficient cases in recent waves from our refreshment source, which is the Health Survey for England. So the aim at wave 10 is to rebalance the cross-sectional sample by following up cases from both the Health Survey for England, but also DWP's Family Resources Survey. So we're going to be issuing around 4,000 households in all from those two sources. And what that means is that we're also going to be able to take the opportunity of having the FRS sample available to us to boost the number of people from ethnic minority backgrounds as well. So we'll be designing that over the next few weeks, but we do have access now from DWP, so that's great. Okay, so turning to the implications of COVID-19, and clearly COVID-19 is a particular threat for an in-home survey with this age group. I mean, as a sector, the research industry is still considering how to respond to it. We're currently still paused in all our face-to-face fieldwork in common with all the other fieldwork agencies. But we are testing some new approaches. These include new protocols, such as screening for symptoms, and the wearing of PPE, social distancing measures in the home, how to handle show cards, and do self-completions by passing laptops. You know, what do you need to do in those situations? But we're also considering alternatives to our face-to-face mode for ELSA. So in particular, we've been trialing video conferencing. So given the very long interview we have with ELSA and the complex nature of it, and the additional report that you get from a face-to-face environment to make all of that work, a video calling approach has definite benefits to it. And so far in trials, it's been really successful with a middle-aged sample. So we're very hopeful for it. Obviously, there are additional challenges with an older profile to our sample in whether or not people feel that they can manage that kind of technology. Ultimately, though, we have to get back to a position where we can do in-home interviewing in terms of those nurse visits. So we'll also be looking at the timing implications that COVID restrictions kind of imply. Looking beyond wave 10, just for a moment, we have funding for a full wave of ELSA at wave 11. So again, that will be a full face-to-face wave. There'll be another refreshment at the lower age range to bring us back to being a study of those aged 50 and over. And nurses will be visiting again, this time to the remaining half of the sample who were not issued at wave 10, as I mentioned. And we also have funding for a WebCATI wave along the lines of the COVID wave that James talked about earlier. So content is still to be developed for that particular bit of data collection, but the recent work that we've done gives us a very high level of confidence that we'll be able to use that WebCATI approach to very good effect. So we're very keen to consider how best to use it. We've been thinking in general about how ELSA can make more use of kind of online methods and what the future might hold for us. And so this is another kind of step in that direction, which is, yeah, it'll be very interesting for us and in terms of how we move forward with ELSA over the coming waves. It may also be that we can use that wave, that WebCATI wave, in a different way and time it differently to the current plan if COVID-19 means we have further delays to the main face-to-face fieldwork approach. Okay, I think that's it from me.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Martin. A couple of questions have come in. One is actually more on my part of it. Somebody has asked about what the new mental health measures will be. I think the main thing that we haven't done in the past is we haven't mentioned anything on anxiety. So we'll be including a standardized anxiety measure in the next wave. So I think that's going to be probably the main change that we're going to make. For Martin, someone has asked, what will the revised ethnicity mix be? What are we trying to get at with that?
Well, in fact, what we're doing, we're not going to target, we're trying to boost the sample over a period of time. So what we're doing is taking all of the available cases from the FRS and from HSE. So taking anyone who is not in the white category essentially, and over time in this wave, in the next wave, we'll look to gradually boost the ELSA sample in that area.
Yes, I think we should emphasize that this is going to be a process which will take place over a number of years. So initially, the ethnic minority sample is not going to be very large, but the plan is to build this up over time. And so we will be able to do more substantive analyses of ethnic minority, older ethnic minority groups, which has been a general lack in this country. We don't have much in these larger data sets. Two other questions. One is whether we're going to bring back the exit interviews. That's the end of life interviews in wave 10. That's something that we'd like to do, but at the moment we still have funding constraints on that. But we are working to see whether we can do something about that. And another question which has been asked, how will wave 10 be conducted if coronavirus is still prevalent next year?
Yeah, it's the big question. So we have a number of options, as I say. So we are looking at protocols that will reduce risk, and they won't eliminate risk. And clearly, we'll have some people who are either unable in their condition to do an in-home interview. It would just be too risky, or simply unwilling to do so. And for that reason, we are developing some additional modes. Video calling is the most promising in that we don't have to transform the instrument that we already have, which is substantial and complicated. So to switch to a telephone mode, for instance, would be tricky. It's a long interview, so it's going to be over 2 hours by the time we put it onto the phone. We could do that in chunks potentially, but it's a big ask. So as I say, we're pursuing changing the protocols, changing to a video approach where we can. But looking at other approaches, we are considering things like electronic devices which can just be left in people's homes, which are tablets essentially, and so wouldn't require internet access and wouldn't require knowing how to tackle Microsoft Teams, for instance, or Zoom. But that's something for us to think about more and develop. But ultimately, we are going to have to get nurses into people's homes, as I say, so we need a solution which allows us to do that for the main part. Nurses are already out there doing in-home blood collection with PPE, masks and aprons and gloves, and at the moment that's our expected way forward.
I think in general, the COVID crisis has changed people's relationship with technology, and we are going to have to take that into account to a greater extent. We do actually have a grant application in for looking at more detail at digital participation, but whether we're funded for that, I don't quite know. But I think we've been encouraged by the fact that our COVID wave, quite substantial numbers of people did do the study online. So I think that's very good. We're almost at the end, but there's just one more question I would like to raise, and I don't know if James Banks is still here. Is the question of whether there's scope for including more data on spending among older people in wave 10?
I know who asked that. It certainly wasn't.
Anonymous asked that.
No, I don't think it was a plant, but we would always love to have more data on spending. And certainly the spending of older people is a very important issue. Exactly getting the right type of questions that can measure the quality of data that we need in the time that's typically available is always the problem. We continue to ask ourselves, can we do more on spending? I think the answer for wave 10 is probably not. It's just too soon, given that, the time that we have to develop the questionnaire, and we certainly haven't intended to do it yet, other than maybe some of these what you might call subjective questions about how spending has been affected by, for example, COVID. But we would like to think about that more for wave 11. As always, we have to think of what would we not ask to create the time for these questions, and that's obviously one of the biggest issues in design. But it's certainly something I would like to think about for wave 11.
Great, thank you. Well, I think our time is up, so I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank the people who've watched on our YouTube channel, and I hope that has worked out okay. And thank you for those people asking questions, and also to all the speakers. This presentation will be available on that channel in the future, and we hope that it's provided useful information for people, and that everyone's going to rush out and see if they can use Wave 9 now with all its new aspects, and try to work with that. But thank you very much indeed. I think we'll stop the YouTube channel now and say goodbye. Bye now.